Welcome to Episode 1, Bootlegging, Counterfeiting, Arson, and a Poisoned Peanut Butter Sandwich, featuring Jill Nock of Mountain State Genealogy. I'm your host, Janet Hall Werner, and this is Black Sheep Family History. Hi, this is Black Sheep Family History, stories of our not-so-illustrious ancestors and how to find them. I'm your host, Janet Hall Werner. I'm a lawyer and I worked as an advocate on Capitol Hill for 25 years until 2016 when I chucked that to pursue my true calling as a professional genealogist. I specialize in finding the stories hidden in the records, as well as DNA, immigration and migration, and research pretty much anywhere east of the Mississippi and some places west. In this series, I'll be talking to other genealogists, as well as telling some of my own black sheep stories that I've uncovered over the years. And if you watch or listen to the end, you'll meet Jaine. Jaine is my somewhat younger, slightly cuter AI avatar, and she'll be hosting what I'm calling educational extras. These are separate episodes on topics family historians love, things like the history of divorce in America, the history of asylums, bootlegging, stuff like that. Black Sheep Family History is available as a podcast if you're on the go, and it's also on YouTube, where I show you the records and the pictures that go along with the story. Search for and subscribe to Black Sheep Family History wherever you get your podcasts, and subscribe to my Black Sheep Family History channel on YouTube. New episodes drop on Hump Day with a new story to get you through the rest of the week. And educational extras hosted by Jaine drop on Fridays. And if you have a black sheep story about one of your ancestors that you'd like to tell, or you'd like me to tell, or if you need research help, please drop me a note at janet@blacksheepfamhist.com. Okay, today I'm talking to Jill Nock. She's an accredited genealogist with Mountain State Genealogy, and she also works with Family Locket. And Jill, what else would you like our viewers and listeners to know about you?
Well, I've been doing family research since about 1977 when the TV miniseries Roots came out, and it has inspired me to learn more about my own family. My paternal grandparents were both gone before I was born, so I never knew them, and my maternal grandfather as well. So I only had my maternal grandmother, Madeline, and her mother-in-law, my great-grandmother, Ida. And Ida passed in 76 when I was about 13, but I grew up staying with her on weekends. And she lived in the same town as we did, so I got to see her quite often. And I loved hearing stories about her when she was age 4. That's when they moved out from Southwest City, Missouri, to the Camas Prairie in north central Idaho, just outside of Grangeville. And so she recounted the train trip and everything. That was really cool to hear as a kid. And then I also grew up knowing about this story that we're going to talk about, my second great uncle, John Matthew Nichols, but only that his wife and her boyfriend tried to murder him, and by feeding him a rat poison and a peanut butter sandwich. And that's the story my grandmother Madeline had told me several times before she passed in 1994. But I was just dumb enough to never ask her for any more details. It's just one of those things as a kid, you just don't think to ask anything else. And she was John's niece. Her dad was his brother. So that's how she knew about it.
Wow, that's a heck of a story to grow up with. And it's a big story. So why don't you, it probably makes the most sense if you just kind of tell it chronologically. But first, just to set the scene, I want to mention that most of the story takes place in the 1920s and 1930s. So if you think about it, the Roaring Twenties, the era of Prohibition, speakeasies, I imagine it was still kind of the Wild West, or maybe there may have been a certain sense of lawlessness, or at least in certain circles anyhow. But why don't you start at the very beginning?
Okay, well, John Nichols was born on February 17th, 1878 in Sugar Creek, Logan County, Arkansas. And his wife, Clara E. Fix, was born on January 10th, 1882 in Big Springs, Kansas. They married on June 21st, 1902 in Pittsburgh County, Oklahoma, which was then still a territory. Oklahoma didn't become a state until 1907. And by 1910, they lived in Spirit Lake, Idaho, where he was a blacksmith. Later, they moved to Chicago, California in about 1914.
Okay, and I saw in your notes that Clara had actually had a run-in, her first run-in with the law when she was still single, along with her mother.
Yeah, yeah, back in Shawnee, Oklahoma in 1899. So Clara would have been about 17 years old then. And what happened was that on December 14th, 1899, she and her mother went from their house just about a mile outside of Shawnee into town, and they paid an old black man to go into a restaurant and tell Thomas Lazelle that a couple of people wanted to see him outside. So when Lazelle came out, he was met with Clara and her mother Susan, who had cowhide whips in their hands.
Oh my.
And they started whipping him, hitting him in the face and neck. And supposedly he had been bad mouthing Clara around town, and they were there to put an end to it.
Wow.
So amid the women's lashing, he ran and was able to get away through the rear yard, the back part of a saloon, and they went home, and the authorities didn't do anything to them. And it was noted in the newspaper that Clara was a, quote, beautiful brunette from Topeka, Kansas, unquote, who had lived in Shawnee for about 3 years. And the newspaper article was unclear if it was 1898 or 1899, but she started clerking for Martel and Lazelle, which was a real estate office. She said that she was to be paid $5 a week, but Lazelle said he agreed to pay her for the work that she did. So she thought she was going to get a salary. He thought he was paying her hourly and said she didn't do very much work. So she claimed that Mr. Lazelle owed her another $90, and he said he had paid her in full. And she sued him. And while it was pending in court, Lazelle supposedly made a derogatory remark about Clara, and it got back to her and her mother. And that's what led to the confrontation in December.
Wow. Well,
Yeah,
$90 was a lot. $90 back then was a lot of money.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So that was a big dispute then. Okay, so after that, the couple gets married and in 1914 they moved to Chico, California, right?
Right. And there, John and Clara and her brother-in-law and her uncle all got in trouble for counterfeiting. This was before they went to Washington and started their bootlegging operation. And as I had mentioned, John was a blacksmith, so he had the tools to fashion the slugs for the coins. And Clara's brother-in-law was Morris Daly, and he knew how to electroplate gold. So John made the slugs, and Morris put the gold on them. And John had a secret room in the back of his blacksmith shop, and that's where they made these coins. And John had had an employee who kind of knew what was going on, and he didn't like it, so he quit. And they passed off a few of the bogus coins at a county fair, and it said a shooting gallery, and then they were caught. And so I think the employee must have ratted them out to the cops, and
Right.
that put them on the path, and then maybe honed in on who it was doing it. They had $1, 50-cent, $5, and $10 gold coins and slugs that they had made. And one of the men making the arrest said that the coins were almost perfect. They were the best that he'd ever seen, and they were only just slightly lighter than a regular coin would have been. And so that was one of the other tip-offs, that they just didn't feel right.
So at that point, coins were a larger denomination than they are now, and of course, money was worth more. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah, because they're the coins were valued for their gold content at that
Right.
point. That's how they made their money, because they could electroplate just the gold on the very outside. So, they're probably out a few pennies on the dollar, maybe.
Right. Right. Okay, that makes sense. Okay,
Yep,
so then the couple's twin sons were born in 1918.
right. Yep. Twin sons, Melvin Melwood and Elvin Elwood, were born on October 16, 1918, and they went by their middle names, Melwood and Elwood.
Melwood and Elwood. Cute. And these were the twins the only children
Yeah,
of John and Clara? Okay.
yeah, they just had the two boys.
Okay. And now, actually, for context, I'll note here that Prohibition begins on January 17th, 1920, so a couple of years after the boys were born.
Right. Yeah. And by this time they had moved back to Spokane, Washington in about 1923.
Okay.
So they were, just a few years into Prohibition, and then they started up this still up there. One of the city directories showed that John was selling auto supplies in 23, and his brother Joe Nichols was a blacksmith. And then by 24, they were both blacksmiths, but they had different shops. And then in 26, their newspaper articles show that John set fire to his house in Garden Springs, which was a little suburb of Spokane at the time. Now it's all, just one big area. So he set fire to his house on January 16th of 26, and the neighbors saw the smoke and quickly rallied and got the fire put out. And a couple of them later testified that they saw live coals in the bed, different beds. And then the very next day after they got that fire out, another one broke out. And it was so hot that the fire department couldn't even put it out, and it burned to the ground.
Hmm.
And one of the neighbors that was nearby was sitting up with his sick son, and he looked out, he heard a noise, he looked out his window, and he saw a vehicle that looked very much like Uncle John's leaving just about the time the fire was just really broke out. So John was tried for arson and insurance fraud. It was showed that he was heavily in debt to local merchants for furniture, and that he had a mortgage on the house.
Mm.
So on March 17th of 26, he was convicted. There was a lengthy trial, and they had, I remember now how many witnesses. They had like 40 some prosecution witnesses and only 10
Wow.
defense witnesses or something like that. Yeah, all the neighbors, they pretty much they brought in to testify about these different parts. One of the kind of funny things was they owned a parrot. I mean, who would think that in 1926 somebody in Spokane, Washington would own a parrot? To
Wow.
me, it just kind of seems exotic.
It does.
But it was noted that as soon as they could get into the house, well, and maybe even while it was still burning, I don't remember how exactly they figured it out, but the bird cage was open and the bird was gone. So they said that was one of the points they used in their circumstantial case, was that he didn't want the bird to die,
Right.
so he took it with him.
Right.
Um, and he said, of course, well, I didn't do it. It's thieves that broke in and they spilled kerosene all over the floor and set it on fire, and that's why it went up so fast. And either they took the parrot with them or they threw it in the furnace.
Oh,
So, yeah, which is a horrible thought.
yeah.
But that was his defense, was I didn't do it. I wasn't even here.
Right.
Supposedly they were at a local hotel staying with other family, which is just kind of random because the boys were in school and he would have had to transport them from Spokane back out to Garden Springs area to take them to school. And in fact, he was taking the boys to school when he drove past his house and saw it was burned down. That's what he claimed. So,
Not a real good defense, I would say.
no. And so he was convicted rather quickly by the jury. And that was June 27 of 26. And he was sentenced to 3 to 10 years in prison. And they had apparently done their research, and down into California, they noted that 5 fires had occurred on premises occupied or owned by him in the previous 13 years. So this was kind of a pattern with Uncle John
Pretty
that,
suspicious.
yeah, money got tight, so he insured everything to the hilt and then burned it down.
Right. Wow.
So he was convicted June 6th and sentenced, and didn't start though his sentence till June 7th of 27. A year later, it said there were several delays, but it really didn't go into what it was.
And so then he goes to prison.
Right. Yeah. Walla Walla State Pen.
Okay. And Clara kept up the bootlegging business while John was in prison.
Yes, she did. And actually, she was called, quote unquote, the brains of the operation.
Uh-huh.
And authorities referred to them as the infamous Nichols gang.
Hmm.
And she had aliases of Goldie Nichols and Eva Black.
Wow.
Yeah. So starting in December of 29, the Prohibition agents got on her trail, and she gave herself up in January of 30, so just a month later. They had a warrant out for her arrest, charging her with liquor manufacturing and possession of utensils for manufacture. And she was released on a temporary $2,500 bond with a hearing set for a week later, which that's a huge bond. And they thought that
Yeah.
they'd raise it a week later when she went back. So yeah, the depression had started. So
Right.
2,500 bucks was pretty big.
Oh, yeah.
And that liquor plant was out at the 5 Mile Prairie, which is northwest of Spokane. And the agent said it was the largest one they'd ever found in eastern Washington.
Wow.
And her gang included 9 men. There was A.P. Moore, alias Pressmore, Clarence E. Miller, Ray Parker, alias Ray Brown, John Holberg, Robert S. Jackson, Harry Jackson, John L. Oberg, Lloyd Parker, and Joe Schrader. And they all pled not guilty to a charge of running the illicit still on 5 Mile. And when I say quote unquote liquor plant, which is the words that the newspaper said, this thing must have been huge, because one of the newspaper articles stated that the federal officers destroyed 1,499 gallons of mash.
Wow.
Oh, right? Yeah. However, in Clara's prison file, it states, quote, 2 alcohol stills, one of 400-gallon capacity and one of 15-gallon capacity, with complete distillery apparatus, domes, columns set up and are in operation. 150-gallon redistilling tank and a 500-gallon still for the manufacture of moonshine whiskey. One 75-gallon still complete, 6,800 gallons of mash, approximately 1,455 gallons of alcohol and moonshine whiskey. In addition to the above, there was a large and costly and complete assortment of dried fruits, malt, grains, sugar, bottles, barrels, jugs, tins, and other things commonly used in the manufacture and sale of intoxicating liquor, unquote. And
Wow.
that was in her prison file.
Wow.
Right.
That's a
Yeah.
lot. That's a lot
Right.
of booze.
Yeah.
Wow.
And some of the guys were the money men. They'd go out and sell it and collect the money and bring it back. Some operated or worked on the stills when they broke down. There were carpenters and plumbers by trade. So,
Wow.
so she had just amassed these guys that worked for her.
Wow.
And of
Quite an
course they got a,
operation.
yeah. And, of course got a share in it, but then they also had to do some time each for them for
Right.
their involvement.
Right.
So then in May 11 of 1930, John was paroled. And September 9th of 1930, Clara was convicted on 3 counts and ordered to serve 15 months and given a $101 fine. Since Washington didn't have a facility to house women, Clara was sentenced to the Oregon State Pen in Salem. And her sentence was reduced to 1 year and 1 day, but she had to pay the full fine of $101. So her terms were, set to run concurrently. So that's why she only ended up with the 15 months total and then reduced to 1 year and 1 day.
Now, I saw in the documents that there was a particularly interesting record among Clara's file, the fingerprint card. If can you describe that to the people who can't see it, the people listening?
In the old days, they used to roll your hands with the ink and you'd had to blot your fingers down. Well, where her middle finger is on the left hand and the ring finger is on the right hand, there's nothing there. They were blank. On there, it said that they were amputated, but it didn't give any information. And so I found an article that explained how she lost one finger. And it says sliver causes loss of finger. Blood poison that started from a tiny sliver yesterday at Deaconess Hospital, which is in Spokane, caused the amputation of the third finger on the right hand of Mrs. Clara Nichols, wife of John Nichols of Garden Springs. The amputation was performed by Dr. Gunning in charge of the case since the family returned from a lake. Mrs. Nichols got the sliver in her finger while handling firewood. While her condition is serious due to a general septicemic condition, her early recovery is expected, according to hospital authorities.
Wow. That really reminds you of how primitive medical care was even at this point.
I wonder, wood, they use a lot of wood in running the stills.
Right.
So I wonder if she was stoking a fire and got the sliver from doing that. And so then she just covered it by saying, oh, well, we were camping, we're at the lake, whatever.
Right. Now that story didn't explain the loss of the second finger or the second digit.
Right. Yeah, the middle finger on her left hand, I don't know what happened. It seems to me that there was, I don't think I did find anything on that. It was just that in her prison file, she noted that she was a candy maker, and that's how she had been supporting herself. The Oregon authorities didn't know why she was being put in there. It was for bootlegging. She didn't own up to any of that part.
Huh.
Because on her intake form, she said she was not guilty.
So Clara was convicted on September 9th, 1930, and then what happened next?
Well, 9 days later, on September 18th, 1930, John died at age 51.
Okay, so we're about to talk about that rat poison peanut butter sandwich, but first we're going to take a quick break. If you're enjoying this episode, please consider supporting the series to keep new episodes coming. There are 5, count them, 5 different ways that you can support the Black Sheep Family History podcast and YouTube video series. Number 1, first and foremost, subscribe to my channel, Black Sheep Family History on YouTube, and turn on your notifications so that you'll be notified when new episodes come out. I drop new episodes on hump days with a new story to get you through the rest of the week. Educational extras hosted by Jaine will drop on Fridays. Number 2, tell your friends. The easiest way to do that is to share this video on Facebook with a note telling your friends it's awesome. And if you happen to be talking to a friend in real life, I'm not sure that actually happens anymore, but if it does, just say, hey, there's this new podcast and YouTube video series called Black Sheep Family History. It's really cool. You should check it out on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Number 3, buy me a coffee. Just go to buymeacoffee.com and search for Black Sheep Family History, or look for the Buy Me a Coffee link in the show notes and buy me a coffee. I actually drink tea, which is priced much more economically, so feel free to buy me too. Number 4, join my Black Sheep Society. For just $5 per month, you can get bonus Black Sheep Society content each week, additional mini Black Sheep stories, and other content that can help you find the Black Sheep in your family tree. Look for a link to the Black Sheep Society in the show notes. And last is number 5. Rate and review this video and drop me a comment or any suggestions in the comments. In particular, let me know what you think of Jaine. Is she cool or is she creepy? Let me know in the comments. Okay, we're back. So, was it murder?
I'm not sure. You'll remember that my maternal grandmother, John's niece, told me several times before she passed that John's wife, Clara, and her boyfriend had tried to murder him by feeding him rat poison in his peanut butter sandwich. A newspaper article at the time supports that John, mistakenly ate rat poison in a peanut butter sandwich, but I can't definitively say that Clara and her boyfriend did it. I have his death certificate, which lists his cause of death as ulcer of the stomach with contributory cause listed as gastric hemorrhage. So, did the rat poison hasten his death? Probably. It's a perhaps, but knowing what rat poison does, that
Yeah.
it likely that it contributed to it.
Right. And there's a newspaper article about the rat poisoning. Well, I'll read it. I have it here.
Yeah,
It's
sorry.
the headline. It's okay. The headline says rat poison not so good used as peanut butter. John Nichols, charged with liquor possession, failed to appear when his case came up Thursday. An investigation of the case brought to light the fact that Nichols thought rat poison his wife had bought was peanut butter. So Nichols is now in the hospital. His case was continued for several days and his bond was fixed at $750.
Yeah, because he was
Mistaken.
doing in booze again.
Right, right. Mistakenly rat poison.
Yeah.
Mistook the rat poison for peanut butter.
Yeah, and the way that article reads, it was just like its own little package that looked like peanut butter.
Right.
So
You'd
I
think
don't
it would
know.
taste pretty different.
Yeah, right? Yeah. One bite, but
Yeah.
that kind of seems to support that she just sprinkled some
Yeah.
maybe in his peanut
In the
butter, knowing
peanut
he was
butter. Right.
you know, the only one gonna eat it, or yeah, I don't
Right.
know.
Yeah. But it's funny, but aside from that one incident, and yes, that's a big incident, but it seemed to me in the story that they really did love each other, or at least most of the time.
Yeah, yeah, it seems like it because they stuck together through the counterfeiting crime and
Right.
conviction and jail sentence, and then through the arson conviction, so birds of a feather.
Right. Definitely.
So in any case, then Clara was convicted of the liquor offense and sentenced to the Oregon State Pen. And on her intake form, it was asked if she had worked for anyone in recent years, and that's where she responded that she just worked for herself and she made homemade candy for sale. So, but she showed up at the Oregon State Pen with $100, which that's just under $2,000
Right.
nowadays. So that's pretty good for candy sales.
Right.
And then John died, like I had said, but it was only a couple days after she had actually been taken to Salem. And so the warden granted Clara the ability to go to his funeral as long as she paid for it, and she paid for the matron to go with her. And so the matron, Mrs. Halley, went with her to Spokane and back.
Oh
And so she
well.
did get to go to John's funeral.
Hmm.
So now basically orphaned. The twins, age 12, were sent to live with Clara's sister and her family. And it wasn't very long before Clara's sister started writing letters to the parole board about how hard it was on her family trying to provide for her own two children plus the twin boys, and that this was Clara's first trouble. Really? She must have didn't think that they knew about the counterfeiting experience.
Right.
Um, but at any rate, there were a lot of letters, and it prompted the parole board to review Clara's case starting in November of 30. So she's only 2 months into her sentence. And so then finally in February of 31, her case was referred from the prison to the parole board, and they let her out, but I couldn't find the exact parole date. It wasn't in her file, which seemed kind of strange. There wasn't a date about it. And then there's for those that can't see it, there's a screenshot of her one of the forms in her prison file, and that's where all that information about the 6,800 gallons of whiskey and everything else came from.
Okay, and then Melwood. So what was their son Melwood up to?
Well, about the same kind of things. He would he was almost 12 when the twins were almost 12 when John died in September of 30. And of course, Clara was already in the Oregon State Pen, and he and his twin brother Alvin were up at Clara's sister. And September of 33, after Clara was already home, Melwood was at a bonfire with some local kids, and he got too close to the fire and his pant leg caught on fire, and that burned him pretty badly. And one of his thumbs, it said, um, later on, I found mention of some scars on his leg, and that prompted me to try and figure out what it was from, and it was this fire.
Wow.
That was his first mention in the newspaper.
Okay. And that was in 1933. Now, later in 1933, on December 5th, just for some more context, December 5th, 1933 is when Prohibition ended.
Right. And with Clara probably paroled in 31, and even after, excuse me, serving one stint in the penitentiary, she went back into the business. By 1934, she had stills and they were raided again. This operation was far smaller than the previous endeavor, and she was sentenced to 4 months in the Spokane County Jail and was convicted in 35. So she denied it again, but they didn't believe her based on her previous history.
Wow.
So she was back in jail again and did those 4 months at the county level. And then 1940 census finds her and the twins in Priest River, Idaho. And then they must have, as my family would say, kept their nose clean. They were fine, not in trouble for about 5 years. And then Melwood shows up in Seattle in August of 45, and he was arrested for burglary and forgery at the time.
In some
And so
ways,
then
he probably never had a chance, really, when you think about it.
right. And, if you think of the 20s and 30s when he was growing up, it was kind of lawless anyway, with
Yeah,
the whole prohibition and it was kind of everybody was doing things.
right, right,
It was a lot of people didn't hold with prohibition, and so they'd make bathtub gin,
right, right,
and just do it for their own consumption. They weren't even selling it. Um, so a lot of that was just given a nod and a wink,
right,
as long as they weren't really flouting how much they're making. So he probably just thought, hey, what the heck?
right.
And my parents been in prison. What are they going to do to me?
Yeah.
It's not like I'm going to get in trouble from them. So, but Melwood did do a stint at Washington State Penitentiary, also in Walla Walla, and he had an alias of George Joseph Bryan. Don't know how he picked up that name, but that's where it says he had tattoos of um, M. Nichols, or no, MMN for his initials, and then he had just Nichols, and then he had Clara for his mother and Lorraine, and I haven't figured out who she is. And then that's where it talked about the skin graft scars on his legs. And actually, from what I could find, he didn't have any skin grafts. He was treated and released from the hospital for those burns, but they probably did scar him. So that's probably what the prison or jail saw. Then there's a couple of different mugshots of him, pretty wild hair.
Yeah,
So, I mean, he just looks like some of the criminals of the day, with
right.
those
Yeah, classic.
the suits and the big wide ties. How they're just crazy then.
Right.
So he had a clemency paperwork there for his forgery. He was sentenced in October of 45 to a term of 2 to 20 years out of Seattle, King County. He was 27 years old, and his occupation was RR man, railroad man. I think he was a fire tender or something like that. So his statement as to why he did the forgery was about the 23rd of March, 1945, I had been drinking pretty heavy. I had signed up to go to Alaska for the New England canneries, and I was celebrating before I left. I ran into a sporting woman, and she went around with me. Finally, we ran out of money, and she made out a check to me, and I cashed it. I was very drunk at the time and didn't know what it meant. Finally, she talked me into cashing several more, and when I sobered up, I realized what I had done. I left town. The sporting woman had the blank checks in her possession at the time. The girl ran off with the money. I only knew her as Bobby. And the prosecutor's statement says he admits cashing the check made out to M. Nichols and endorsing it, his own name on it. He also admits cashing other checks, and he pleaded guilty to the charge of forgery.
Yeah. That sporting woman was a great line. The
Right.
sporting woman.
Yeah. And that was just a euphemism for a prostitute.
Right, right.
Soiled doves, fallen angels, but that was one I think more this century, well, not this century, the
Right.
1900s.
Yeah.
They had moved on to Sport and Woman.
Yeah. And do you know if he was granted clemency?
Yeah, he was let out the first time in February of 47, so he didn't even do 2 full years.
Hmm.
But then he violated parole in June of 49, so he was back. He was let out again in June of 50 after doing another year. Violated in March of 51, let out again in May of 52, and violated again in February of 54. And
Wow.
then he is finally paroled in 54, and I think that's probably the last he was in. I
Wow.
don't know for sure, but that's all I found at that point.
Okay. And now what was Clara up to during these years?
Just well, she died in 50,
Right.
so he was out a couple years before she died. So he Melwood, apparently this was happening in Spokane County, and they all went down to San Diego. I think Elwood was down there, and so then that's where Clara died.
Okay.
But in 47 and 49, they were in Priest River, Idaho, and Clara left a memorial tribute to John, and the newspaper article said Nichols, John M., September 30, 1930. In memory of our beloved husband and father, his memory is as dear today as in the hour he passed away. Mrs. Clara Nichols, Melwood and Elwood.
And I mean, it really does seem like she loved him a lot. Or maybe she had a guilty conscience from that peanut butter sandwich.
Yeah, yeah, it could be, absence makes the heart grow fonder, that kind of thing.
Right. Right. Okay, so then she died in January of 1950 in San Diego.
Right, yeah. And they sent her body back to Spokane, and she's buried next to John, and they share a headstone together.
Okay, well that's a crazy story.
Yeah,
Let's talk. Well, first of all, I understand you knew Melwood when you were growing up.
yeah, yeah. He and his wife, he married in, I think, about 61. Um, they used to come and visit my grandma and her brother Joe, and from time to time in the 70s and 80s. And I just remember that Melwood drank and smoked, and he had this big, loud laugh. And it would end with almost a wheeze because he'd laugh so hard he'd run out of breath. One of those things. And
Yeah.
he laughed a lot. He didn't seem like he was mean or anything. He kind of a happy drunk. And he talked about being a hobo and catching trains on the freight or rides on the freight trains when he was a kid down in California.
Wow. And did you know at that time that he had been in prison?
No, mm-mm.
Okay.
Nope. I hadn't a clue, and
And
but
nobody talked about it.
no, no, not when he was around anyway. And talking later after I had found Uncle John's file and everything, and talking to my mom, she knew that Melwood had been in prison, and
Okay.
that Elwood had probably too.
Hmm.
So, it
Okay.
just seems like run-ins with the law ran in that family, you
Right.
know.
Right. Well, that's some story. Let's talk a little bit about how you found the records. So when and how did you first start researching this family?
Well, I use the Washington State Digital Archives a lot in my genealogy business and family research and stuff. And I saw that they had one that was called Institutional Records. And so I just put in Uncle John's name and it came up.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And it gives, some information about it. It had like his name, his inmate number, the crime that he is convicted of, the place of conviction, the date, his birthplace, age, and a reference number. So, I knew from several of those that it was the same guy. And then there's a link on the email on that page with an email address that you can request it.
Okay.
And when I originally found this file was 2013 and sent in my email request, and they told me that I'd have to come over to Olympia to access it. and that I'd have to arrange it ahead of time because they'd have to pull it out of storage. And since I'm outside of Lewiston, which is over 300 miles, I thought, well, maybe someday, not going
Right.
to make a trip over there for this. Then in April of 2023, I took the Applied Genealogy Institute class, Criminal Records with Michelle Custer Bates. And I thought, oh, I'll use Uncle John, for this. And I already had the file by that point, because then in 2019, I asked one of my sisters had moved to Western Washington. And so I asked her if she had time, she'd run to Olympia for me and actually make a copy of everything. And so I emailed her and she said, yeah, and emailed her all the information that she needed and the contact information for the person at the archives. A week later, my sister sent me the file. It was digitized. In
Wow.
between that 6-year period, Washington State had digitized all those files and it didn't cost me anything.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
And that's where I got, of course, the prison record had his mugshot and a lot of these other details that I was able to confirm with newspaper articles and stuff.
And then, so that was just John. And then what about the records for Clara?
That was Oregon State Archives.
Right.
And there's a button on the website. If you go to the Oregon Historical Records Index area, that's where you can search, and her name came up.
Okay.
And there's just an order button. And so I clicked on it, and then they send you an email and tell you how much it's going to be. And that one was just under $30 for hers.
Okay.
And then I went back out in preparation for Michelle's class and ordered Melwood's, and that one was $15 at that time from the Washington State Archives. So really still pretty minimal to get all
Yeah.
this information and the photos. The mugshots are
Oh, yeah.
priceless.
Yeah.
I had, up to that point, I had one picture of both John and Clara. And Clara was actually with my great grandmother in a 1914 picture in Chico.
And you got that crazy fingerprint card with the missing digits.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
worth
Which
30
prompted
bucks
more
right there.
questions. Yeah. Yeah. Because it's just one thing will lead to another question. That's what
Right.
genealogy is. You think you're going to solve something and it's like, oh, well, why did that happen? And so
Right.
then you got to track something else
Right.
down.
And I have to say the newspaper research, I mean, wow. That must have been something, uncovering all those articles.
Yeah. Yeah. It was a lot of fun. And, like I said, one just leads to another. And it was just fascinating to find detail after detail, like the parrot that
Right.
figured into the testimony. Um,
Yeah.
So yeah,
Wow.
and it took a while to, I
Oh,
have
sure.
50 or 60 newspaper articles on
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
So, but
Thank God
it's
for
all
optical character recognition.
right. Yeah.
Okay, so there in stories like this, there's always some loose ends. So what are your loose ends?
Well, right now the California records. I'd
Yeah.
love to be able to find um, John and Clara's and her brother-in-law Morris Daly, because he tried to take all the blame, and then John, he tried to shoulder the blame too, and they tried to leave Clara's uncle out of it, but they said no, all four of them were guilty, and they
Mm.
all had to do some time and pay fines, and Clara's fine was the most. It was just
Really?
like $500. Yeah. So it was great. And she had the cash to do it. I don't know if she paid in counterfeit coins or not.
That
So
would, yeah.
yeah. So and then I don't know if I could find any mention of Elwood either.
Okay.
So they're on my someday list.
Yeah, the someday
Trying to
list.
track that down. Yeah.
We all have the someday list. Well, that was a heck of a story. And I gotta say, your research is just amazing. So congratulations on finding all that.
Oh,
And
thank you.
now, you mentioned that you also have a distant cousin in Pennsylvania whose cause of death was judicial electrocution.
Yeah. Yep. That's another one, and I've got over 100 and some articles on
Oh
him
my
from
God.
newspapers. Yeah.
Wow. Okay,
Yeah.
well, we'll have to have you back to talk about that.
That sounds great.
Well, thank you so much, Jill. This was a lot of fun. It was wonderful to have you here on Black Sheep Family History. Okay, stay tuned to meet Jaine, my slightly younger, somewhat cuter AI avatar. She will introduce our educational extra episode that goes along with today's story. Okay, we're back, and now it's finally time to introduce Jaine. As I've said, Jaine is my somewhat younger, slightly cuter AI version of myself. I'm Janet, she's Jaine. Get it? Except she spells her name Jaine because, well, AI. And Jaine has my voice, but I want to always state unequivocally that the research that Jaine presents is mine. And I use AI as a research tool, but I check all the work and I stand behind it. I am the human in the loop. So Jaine, if you could introduce yourself and tell us what you have for us to go along with this week's story. Hi, my name is Jaine. I'm the AI version of Janet Hall Werner, and I'm the host of the Black Sheep Educational Extras series from Black Sheep Family History. Today I'm introducing my video on bootlegging in America, crime, culture, and consequences. I hope you'll join me. If you watch or listen to the end, the program should come up next in your YouTube or podcast feed. Okay, thanks, Jaine. Hey, so let me know what you think of Jaine. Is she cool or is she creepy? Let me know in the YouTube comments. Thanks for watching Black Sheep Family History, stories of our not-so-illustrious ancestors and how to find them. Remember to subscribe to the Black Sheep Family History channel on YouTube, and remember all the other ways that you can support this podcast and video series to keep these episodes coming. And if you have a Black Sheep story you'd like to share, or you'd like me to share, or if you need research help, drop me a note at janet@blacksheepfamhist.com. See you next time. Black Sheep Family History is produced, edited, and narrated by me, Janet Hall Werner. YouTube videos are edited with DaVinci Resolve and Shotcut. The podcast is edited with Audacity. The Black Sheep Family History logo was designed by my daughter, Katie Werner, with a sheep created by ChatGPT. Jaine was created by ChatGPT and is animated with D-ID. Educational extras are narrated by me with assistance from a voice clone from 11 Labs. Music is created using Suno AI. Video clips, where they exist, are created using Google Gemini. Genealogical research is conducted by Black Sheep Family History guests, and educational extras are researched by me with assistance from AI tools ChatGPT and Perplexity AI. Sign up for the Black Sheep Society to receive bonus Black Sheep content to help you discover the Black Sheep in your family tree. And note that sheep is both singular and plural, meaning you may have more than one. Consider supporting the series by making a contribution through buymeacoffee.com. Subscribe to our channel, Black Sheep Family History, on YouTube, and search for Black Sheep Family History wherever you get your podcasts, and follow the show.